A millionaire catches Nanny sleeping on his late wife's bed. What he did next changed everything. Daniel Reed removed his headphones, eyes fixed on his computer screen with quiet exhaustion. As an architect working from home since his wife's passing, virtual meetings had become a heavy routine in his new reality. But something felt off today. 3 hours had gone by, a long video call with overseas clients. And yet, what concerned Daniel most wasn't the blueprints on the screen, it was the silence. Sophie, his 9-month-old daughter, hadn't cried. Not once in 3 hours. No fussing, no whimpering, not even a sleepy murmur. That wasn't normal. Since Julia, his wife, had passed 6 months ago, Sophie had cried almost constantly, as if calling for someone who would never answer. Daniel frowned. Silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. He pushed back from his desk, heart pounding, and walked briskly down the hall toward the bedroom. Elena Cruz, the new housekeeper he had hired just 2 weeks ago, was supposed to be downstairs cleaning. She was young, quiet, and seemed to carry something heavy behind her soft eyes. She worked hard, never complained, never asked questions, exactly what Daniel needed right now. The bedroom door was ajar. He nudged it open and froze. Elena was asleep on the large bed, the bed he had once shared with Julia during 7 years of marriage. Sophie was nestled in her arms, peacefully asleep, her little face relaxed in a way Daniel hadn't seen in months. Rage surged like a wave. How dare the housekeeper lie in his bed? How dare she hold his daughter like that, as if she were her own? This was the bed where Julia had dreamed about their future, where they whispered plans of more children. Daniel could still smell her perfume in the sheets. What the hell is going on here? His voice shattered the silence like a whip. Elena startled awake, her wide brown eyes filled with panic. Sophie stirred but did not wake. "Mr. Daniel, I can explain," she whispered, trying not to wake the baby. "Explain?" Daniel nearly shouted. "You're lying in my bed with my daughter?" Elena sat up slowly, still cradling Sophie. "Please don't raise your voice. She'll wake up." "Don't tell me what to do with my own daughter." His voice spiked, but he lowered it immediately when Sophie shifted in her sleep. Elena rose slowly, each movement gentle, like she was holding something precious. "I know it looks very wrong, but please, let me explain." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to suppress the fury. "You're a housekeeper. Do you understand what you've done?" Elena's lips trembled, her eyes glassy, but her voice remained steady. "I heard Sophie crying, desperately, for over an hour. You were in a meeting, and she sounded broken, not tired, not hungry, just lost. And that gave you the right to lie in my bed?" "No, sir, it didn't." Elena inhaled deeply. "But when I held her, she stopped crying, completely. It was like all she needed was to feel someone cared." Daniel looked down at his daughter, still sleeping soundly in Elena's arms. It was true. Sophie hadn't looked this peaceful in months. Her cheeks were rosy, her breath slow and steady. No little sobs cutting through her sleep like usual. "She was exhausted from crying," Elena whispered. "I thought if I just lay with her for a few minutes, maybe she'd truly rest." "I didn't think, Mr. Daniel. I just acted on instinct." "Instinct?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Your instinct is to invade my privacy, to lie in the bed my wife—" His voice cracked on the word wife. Elna saw it, the raw pain behind his eyes, and paused. "The bed where your wife used to sleep," she finished gently. "I know, sir, and I'm sorry. It wasn't disrespect. It was love. For her." Daniel looked at Elena, really looked at her, for the first time. A young woman, soft features, holding his child like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Love?" he echoed, confused. "You don't even know her." "Sometimes," Elena said softly. "We don't need to know someone to love them." Sophie breathed softly in Elena's arms, nestling closer. For the first time since the accident, Daniel saw his daughter so at ease. "Please, give her to me." Daniel reached out his hands. Elena hesitated for a second, then obeyed. The moment Sophie changed arms, something happened. She didn't wake, but her body tensed slightly, as if sensing a shift in energy. Daniel held his daughter and noticed the difference immediately. Sophie was truly resting. She breathed deeply, no longer interrupted by the small sobs that usually slipped into her sleep. "How did you do it?" he whispered. The anger had given way to curiosity. Elena looked up at him, hesitant. "I used to care for my nephew, Matthias, every day for 2 years, while my sister worked." Daniel nodded slightly, eyes still on Sophie. 3 months ago, Matthias passed away from meningitis. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save him." She paused, took a shaky breath, and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "Since that day, I haven't been able to hear a child cry without feeling like I'm being torn apart." Daniel finally looked at her. Elena had her head lowered, still rocking Sophie gently in an unconscious rhythm. "Sophie's crying today. It sounded just like Matthias when he was in pain. Not hunger, not tiredness. It was the sound of a child whose world had broken, and she didn't understand why." Daniel absorbed her words like needles piercing his chest. Because he knew, he had cried like that too, in silence, in the dark, when no one was watching. "Her world did break," he murmured, almost to himself. Elena nodded. "But that doesn't mean it has to stay broken." Silence returned, but now it was filled with something new. 2 people who for a moment stopped hiding their grief and simply shared it. Daniel exhaled, taking a step back as if the truth between them was too heavy to hold all at once. "Elena," he began, hesitating, "what you did today wasn't appropriate by any standard, but—" Elena looked up. "But Sophie hasn't slept like this in months." She smiled through her tears. "Sometimes love doesn't follow standards, does it?" Daniel sat down on a nearby chair, watching the 2 of them. This ordinary woman, no childcare degree, no formal training, yet she had done what nurses, doctors, and even he hadn't been able to do: make Sophie feel safe. "I need someone to help me care for her," Daniel said, his tone more serious now. "Not just bottles and diapers, someone who really listens to her, understands her." Elena said nothing. She looked down at Sophie, then back at Daniel. "I'm offering you a new job," he continued. "Full-time nanny for Sophie. Live in. What do you say?" Elena looked at Sophie. Now the little girl had opened her eyes, watching curiously, no longer showing any sign of restlessness. I don't know if I should, sir." "Why not?" "Because—" Elena took a deep breath. "Because I've grown too attached to her, and that might make things complicated." Daniel considered her words. "Maybe that's exactly why it works. Julia always said, children need someone who truly cares, not just someone who does their duty." "Then it's decided," he said, with a steadier voice than he had spoken in months. "Will you accept?" Elena looked at Sophie. The baby had already reached out toward her. How could she resist? Days had passed since Daniel made his offer, yet Elena still hadn't given a definite answer. Every morning she arrived on time to clean, and every afternoon Daniel grew restless, waiting for a response that never came. Elena was torn. She knew that accepting would mean crossing a dangerous line, not only professionally, but emotionally. She had grown far too attached to Sophie, and she was beginning to care for Daniel as well, though she tried to deny it to herself. That Wednesday, Daniel came home early, determined to settle the matter once and for all. He found Elena in the kitchen preparing milk for Sophie. "Elena, we need to talk." He leaned against the counter. "About what, Mr. Reed?" They both knew perfectly well what it was about. "You've been avoiding me for the past 3 days. Whenever I ask about the nanny position, you change the subject." Elena stirred the milk more vigorously than necessary. "I'm not avoiding you, sir. I've been thinking." "Thinking about what? Sophie adores you. She only sleeps well when you're around. And Daniel hesitated. "I need this help." From the crib in the next room, Sophie began to whimper. Elena instantly dropped what she was doing and ran to pick her up. Daniel followed, once again witnessing the miraculous transformation. The moment Sophie was in Elena's arms, she calmed immediately. "See," Daniel said, "how could you possibly refuse?" Elena rocked Sophie gently, avoiding his gaze. "Mr. Reed, I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of getting too attached, afraid of starting to feel like she's my own child." "And then?" Her voice broke. Daniel stepped closer, watching Sophie fit perfectly in Elena's arms. "And then what?" "And then one day you won't need me anymore, and I'll have to leave. I've already lost someone I loved, Mr. Reed. I don't know if I could bear it again." Her honesty struck Daniel deeply. He had never considered that she too was fragile, afraid of being hurt. "Elena, look at me." She reluctantly lifted her eyes. "I won't send you away. Sophie needs you. I need you." The words escaped with more force than he had intended. An awkward silence fell. "As her nanny," he quickly added, "I need you to be Sophie's nanny." Elena nodded, though her eyes showed she understood more than his words admitted. "If I accept, what are the conditions?" Daniel exhaled. For the first time, she seemed genuinely interested. "You'll come every day, 8 to 6. Only take care of Sophie. Feeding, bathing, playing, sleeping. I'll pay you 3 times your cleaning salary." Elena's eyes widened. 3 times? "Sophie is my priority, and you give her something I haven't been able to. Peace." Elena looked down at Sophie. The baby was already sleeping soundly in her arms again. "And what about the others in the house? How will they react?" Daniel frowned. "Which others?" "Deborah. She comes on Tuesdays to do the ironing, and Tom, the groundskeeper. They'll think it strange that I'm treated differently." "Elena, you don't understand. You're not just another employee anymore. You'll be Sophie's nanny. That's a completely different role." She shook her head. "You don't know. To them, I'll still be the cleaning lady who got promoted. There will be jealousy, gossip." Daniel had grown up in a world where such dynamics were invisible. Her words made him reflect on things he had never considered. "You think it'll be a problem?" "It'll be a challenge, but—" Elena looked at Sophie. "For her, I'll face any challenge." Warmth spread through Daniel's chest at her words. "Then you'll accept?" Elena took a deep breath. "Yes, but I also have conditions." "Tell me." "First, I want you to learn to care for your daughter properly. I won't replace her mother. I'm here to support." Daniel was impressed by her maturity. "Second, if one day you feel I'm no longer good for Sophie, tell me directly." "Third, I work with love, Mr. Reed. I can't pretend not to care. If that's a problem—" "It isn't," Daniel cut in. "That's exactly what she needs." Elena smiled, finally relaxing. "Then we have an agreement." "We have an agreement." They looked at each other for a moment, and Daniel realized that the air between them had changed. This was not just a professional arrangement. It was the beginning of a bond more complicated than he had ever imagined. A week had passed since Elena officially took on the role of Sophie's nanny. Daniel's home began to shift, not through furniture or redecorating, but through sound. The kind of sounds that had been missing for 6 months. Sophie's soft giggles, her attempts at babbling, and sometimes Elena's gentle singing as she rocked the baby in her arms. Daniel could hardly believe it. Sophie no longer cried through the night. She slept soundly, ate with appetite, and laughed. A lot. Every evening when Daniel came home, he'd find Elena and Sophie either playing on the living room floor or lying together on the rug, sunlight casting warm tones on Sophie's curls and Elena's long brown hair. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel walked through the front door and paused in the living room doorway. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor, Sophie in her lap, clapping tiny hands against Elena's to the rhythm of a song. "Clap, clap, little hands. Go, Sophie!" Elena sang softly, and Sophie tried to mimic the claps, then tipped backward and burst into laughter. Daniel couldn't help but smile. He leaned on the doorway, watching silently. There was something deeply healing in that scene. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't quiet, but it was alive, full of love. He hadn't felt anything like this since Julia left this world. Suddenly, Sophie spotted him. She stopped playing, her eyes lit up, and her hands reached out. "Papa?" Daniel froze. He thought he must have misheard. But Elena turned to him, smiling wide. "She's been practicing that word for 2 days," she said, "but this is the first time she said it while seeing you." Daniel stepped forward, dropped to his knees, and scooped Sophie into his arms. The little girl squealed with joy and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Papa! Papa!" He held her tight, tears welling in his eyes. "My little princess, Daddy's here," he whispered, his voice thick. Sophie touched his nose and giggled, a little habit Julia used to teach her. Daniel pulled her close, a wave of pain and warmth rushing through him all at once. Elena stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, even though his throat felt tight. "Yeah, it's just," Julia always said, the first papa would be a special moment. Elena looked at him, long and quiet, then said gently, "And it is special. I believe she was here to witness it." Daniel looked at her, surprised by the sensitivity in her words. "You believe that?" She nodded slightly. "I believe people we truly love never really leave us. They stay, in every moment, every touch, every smile, especially when love still lives here." Daniel couldn't speak. He simply held Sophie tighter, letting her head rest against his chest to hear his heartbeat. Sophie reached for Elena's hair, tugging it playfully and giggling. "Ow! Again with the hair pulling. If you keep pulling, I'll have to cut my hair." Elena laughed, leaning back a bit. "Don't cut it," Daniel said quickly. "Your hair, it's beautiful when you wear it down like that." Elena paused, cheeks flushing, but smiled. "Thank you," she replied softly. For a moment they stood closer than ever. No words, no need for any. Just a child's laughter, and something light and near, something that felt a lot like family. That night, Daniel was reviewing reports in his study when he heard Sophie giggling in her room. By reflex, he waited for Elena, then remembered she had already left. He stood up to check, but froze when he heard a sound coming from the nursery. Sophie wasn't crying. She was babbling as if talking to someone. Daniel cracked the door open. Sophie was standing in her crib, clutching the teddy bear Elena had given her, murmuring softly. "Ma, Ma." Daniel's heart clenched. She was trying to say, "Mama," a word she had never had the chance to call Julia. Then he realized what left him breathless. Sophie wasn't staring into empty space. She was looking directly at a spot beside the crib as if someone were there. Sophie continued. Daniel understood. She was trying to say, Elena. The image of mother in Sophie's mind was not a memory of the woman she had lost, but the woman who had stepped in to fill that void. Daniel stepped back from the door, his heart pounding. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or guilty. Julia would always be Sophie's mother, but Elena was becoming something just as important and just as dangerous for the fragile balance he had tried to maintain. He returned to his study, but couldn't focus. His mind kept circling back to one question. What exactly was happening between the three of them? And more importantly, how far was he willing to let it go? The bond between Elena and Sophie grew stronger each day. The moment Elena entered the room, Sophie would reach out instinctively, waiting for a hug. On sunny afternoons, they would walk down the tree-lined streets, Elena humming softly while Sophie giggled like a little bird. But not everyone in the house welcomed the change. Deborah, the longtime laundry lady, began watching Elena with different eyes. She had worked for Daniel even before Sophie was born. To Deborah, this house had rules. Employers were employers, workers were workers, and boundaries were not to be blurred. One afternoon, Elena sat on the sofa, Sophie sleeping peacefully on her chest. Deborah passed by, then stopped, arms crossed. "You look quite comfortable," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Elena looked up, slightly surprised. "She just fell asleep in my arms. I didn't want to wake her." "In my day, house staff didn't sit on the sofa, and they certainly didn't lie around holding the boss's child like they were the mother." Elena froze. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. "Sophie needs to be held. I just wanted her to sleep peacefully." Deborah raised an eyebrow. "There are many ways for a young girl to climb the ladder, but I've never seen someone move this fast." "What do you mean?" Elena asked, keeping her voice calm. "I mean, you know what you're doing. Girls like you don't just want a job. They want the house, too." Elena's hands clenched. In her arms, Sophie stirred, as if she too could feel the heavy energy in the room. "That's enough, Deborah." Daniel's voice came from behind, cold, steady. Deborah spun around. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." Daniel stepped in, eyes sharp. "She is my daughter's nanny, the only one who's helped Sophie sleep and smile again. If anyone here has a problem with that, they may want to re-examine their role." Deborah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Her presence in this home is my decision," Daniel continued. "And I won't let anyone upset Sophie, not even those who've worked here for decades." Elena lowered her head. She said nothing, just held Sophie closer, as if shielding something sacred she nearly lost. After that day, the air in the house changed. Deborah became quieter, more withdrawn, but her eyes still carried judgment. Elena, too, grew quieter. The light in her smile dimmed. Daniel noticed. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, he found Elena in the kitchen, her hand resting on a cup of untouched tea. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Elena turned, hesitation in her gaze. "Maybe I should leave." "What? Elena? Maybe she's right. Maybe I am crossing lines. This is your house. Sophie is your daughter. I'm just the help." Daniel stepped closer. "No, you are not just the help." Elena looked at him, eyes welling up. "I don't want Sophie growing up around whispers, around eyes that judge. I don't want her to feel that divide, because I grew up with it. And it's cruel." Daniel nodded, then whispered, "Then let me protect this. Protect both of you." She looked at him for a long time. She didn't say a word. But in her eyes, a fragile trust had begun to form, shaky but real. It was a rainy evening, the breeze slipping through the cracked open window, carrying the scent of wet earth and rustling leaves. In the living room, soft candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the ceiling, creating a space that felt sacred. Elena sat in the center of the room, with Sophie sleeping peacefully on a floor mat beside her. Around them were sprigs of dried herbs, a few small bells, and a bowl of water placed within a ring of white salt. Daniel entered and stopped in the doorway, surprised. "What's going on here?" he asked, half curious, half confused. Elena looked up, her eyes glowing with a quiet confidence not often seen. "I'm doing a cleansing ritual for Sophie," she said gently. "It's nothing dangerous, just a way to protect her from heavy energies. Daniel stepped forward slowly, sitting across from her. The candlelight softened his features. "You believe in this?" Elena nodded. "My mother taught me. When someone has been through pain, whether a child or an adult, their spirit can sometimes feel disconnected. Rituals like this help call it back, help them feel whole again." Daniel fell silent. He looked down at Sophie, sleeping deeply in the gentle glow. Under the candlelight, she looked like a tiny angel, fragile, needing protection. "Have you done this for anyone else?" he asked. Elena nodded. "For my nephew, before he passed, and for myself, after." Daniel looked up at her. There was something in her eyes, tender, steady, as if she wasn't just taking care of Sophie, but healing herself too. "So, you think Sophie is hurting?" "No," Elena smiled. "I think she's healing. But sometimes, when we're healing, parts of us are still missing." She rang a small bell, its soft chime rippling through the space like a wave. Daniel didn't take his eyes off her. He had never believed in rituals, energy, or spirits, but this moment felt too real, too beautiful. Elena scattered dried flower petals around Sophie, whispering words Daniel couldn't understand. But he could feel them, like a prayer, a promise, a gentle request from the heart. When she looked up, Daniel whispered, "Can you do that for me?" Elena blinked. "For you?" He nodded. "I think I lost a part of my spirit after Julia died." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded softly. She pointed to the mat beside Sophie. "Sit here." Daniel did. He sat across from her, hands on his knees. She closed her eyes, placing a hand lightly over his heart. "It's not superstition," she said softly. "It's just a way to remind you that you're still here, still alive, still capable of love." Daniel didn't open his eyes, but he felt something. The warmth of Elena's hand, the soft bell chime, the floral scent of herbs and petals, blending together into a strange, calming peace he hadn't known in years. Suddenly, from behind, a tiny voice broke the silence. "Mama?" Both opened their eyes. Sophie was sitting up, still drowsy, her arms reaching out to Elena. Daniel froze. "What did she just say?" he whispered. "Mama," Sophie repeated, then leaned into Elena's arms. Elena, stunned, held the baby close. Her eyes shimmered. "I didn't teach her that," she said softly. "Neither did I," Daniel replied. They looked at each other. No words spoken, but their hearts said everything. Since that night's ritual, neither of them spoke again about the word "mama," Sophie had whispered. But both Daniel and Elena knew something had shifted. Not abruptly, not obviously, but quietly, like a leaf falling gently onto the surface of a still lake. In the days that followed, Daniel began coming home earlier. He never gave a reason, nor did he need to. He simply wanted to be there, to sit in the kitchen while Elena stirred Sophie's porridge, or watch the two of them color together beneath the soft glow of the evening lamp. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Elena sat on the back porch, wrapped in a light scarf, eyes gazing up at the starlit sky. Daniel walked out, holding 2 mugs of warm cocoa. "It's starting to get cold," he said, handing her one. "Thank you," Elena smiled. "I love this feeling. Quiet, just enough." They sat side by side, not speaking for a while. Only the distant chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of wind through the trees filled the silence. "Do you think," Daniel finally said, voice low, "that maybe we've become something neither of us expected?" Elena turned to him. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." Daniel chuckled softly. "Just sometimes when I look at you and Sophie, I feel like I'm seeing something right, something Julia would have smiled at if she were watching." Elena paused. Mentioning Julia in this moment felt delicate, but Daniel's voice didn't carry sorrow. It held gratitude. "I'm not trying to replace her," Elena whispered. "I know, and you don't have to." Daniel looked at her. "You're you, and you've given Sophie something no one else has." Elena stared into her cocoa. "I used to think emotions could be managed, that if I stayed within boundaries, everything would be safe. But feelings don't listen." Daniel let out a small laugh, then grew quiet again. There was something in his eyes now, something no longer guarded. "Elena," he said, voice low, "I used to think there was no room left in me. That when Julia died, everything inside me died too. But you didn't come knocking loudly. You just quietly walked in." Elena turned her face away, as if afraid his gaze could see through her. "I shouldn't have loved that child this much, but I did, and I shouldn't let myself feel something for you. But She stopped. Daniel waited. He didn't push. "But I've started to feel something," she whispered. A soft breeze passed. A dried leaf twirled down from the trees, spinning gently before landing on the porch railing. Daniel reached out and gently touched her hand. "You're not alone in that." They sat like that, not kissing, not embracing, no promises made. Just a quiet acknowledgement that their hearts had touched even as the past lingered and the future remained unknown. That morning, Daniel sat across from Dr. Patel, the therapist who had been with him since the early days after Julia's death. In the softly lit room with ambient background music, he felt like he could finally breathe. "You look lighter than last time," Dr. Patel began, offering a warm smile. Daniel nodded. "I think I am. Sophie, she laughs more now, sleeps better. And me, I feel like I'm coming back to life." "What changed?" Daniel looked down at his hands for a moment, then said quietly, "Elna? The nanny?" the doctor asked without judgment. Daniel nodded. "She's not just caring for Sophie, she's become a part of our family. A part that's healing something I thought was permanently broken." "And that makes you feel guilty?" the doctor guessed, as accurately as always. Daniel gave a soft, bitter laugh. "I once promised Julia I wouldn't let anyone else into the space she left behind." "Daniel," Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly, "you loved Julia. That love was real, and it still is. But opening your heart to someone new doesn't erase it. The heart is not a room with only one chair." Daniel sat quietly, letting the words settle. "The heart can expand," the doctor continued, "as long as the new person isn't there to replace, but to coexist." Elsewhere, Elena sat in her small room, phone pressed to her ear. On the other end, her mother's voice, steady, warm, and comforting like childhood lullabies. "Mama, what if I fall in love with someone I shouldn't?" "What makes you think you shouldn't?" "Because of their past, their place in life. The distance between us isn't just age or status, but wounds that haven't healed yet." Her mother's tone softened. "Do you love the child?" "I love her like my own." "And the man?" "It's starting, Mama." There was a pause. Then her mother replied, gently but firmly, "You're not wrong for loving. You just need to remember, true love doesn't ask for position or title or permission. It only asks for sincerity." Elena leaned her head back against the pillow, eyes closing. "But I'm scared, Mama." "I know, but you have the right to love, my girl. You don't have to be anyone else. You just have to be yourself, and brave enough to believe you deserve it." Elena didn't reply, but something inside her loosened, a knot untied, a breath released. That weekend, it rained all day. The wind beat against the windows, and the steady patter of raindrops on the glass roof made the house feel smaller, warmer, more intimate. Sophie lay curled in Elena's arms, cheeks flushed from a mild fever. Every so often she whimpered softly, then drifted back to sleep, exhausted. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, hand resting on Sophie's forehead, worry in his eyes. "The doctor said it's just a light fever from the weather shift," Elena whispered. "I gave her the medicine. She just needs rest." Daniel nodded, but he didn't leave the room. They sat like that, one at the head of the bed, the other cradling a child. Every soft cough from Sophie made both of them flinch, hearts tight. "The first time Julia got sick," Daniel said suddenly, "I panicked, called 3 different doctors in 2 hours. She just laughed and said, 'Daniel, it's just a cold, not the end of the world.'" Elena smiled gently. She must have been a wonderful mother. "She was light," Daniel replied softly. "But you know, I've realized lately, light doesn't disappear. It just changes form." Elena didn't respond, but inside her, every word touched something old, something long buried, and warmed it. By late night, Sophie had fallen into a deep sleep, her breathing steady. Elena laid her down carefully, tucking the blanket around her. Daniel still hadn't left. Elena turned to him. "You should rest a bit. I'll stay with her." Daniel shook his head. "I want to be here, with you, with her." A short silence passed. Then, like the rain outside, Daniel reached out and gently brushed her cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, "not just for caring for Sophie, but for giving me a sense of family again." Elena blinked, her lips trembling slightly. "Daniel!" He leaned in slowly, not urgently, not forcefully, just a little closer, to be sure this was what they both wanted. And Elena didn't pull away. Their lips met, softly, like touching something sacred. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet promise without words. "I've opened my heart." "So have I." When they pulled away, Elena gave a teary smile. "You just kissed your nanny," she whispered. Daniel smiled back tenderly. "No, I just kissed the woman whose voice made my daughter say, 'Mama,' for the first time." A flash of lightning lit up the window, briefly bathing the room in white. Elena looked down at Sophie, still sleeping, and for the first time, didn't feel like an outsider. Summer arrived gently, bringing golden sunlight and the salty breeze of the sea. Daniel decided to take Sophie and Elena to a quiet beach town, not for a vacation, but to simply breathe together. The little wooden house they rented sat right on the sand, facing the ocean. Every morning, Sophie ran barefoot along the shore, her tiny hand wrapped around Elena's, both of them laughing like wild birds. Daniel often walked behind them, silently watching, a little girl once lonely and a woman once wounded, now glowing in the early light. That evening, Daniel suggested they go to the beach to stargaze. Sophie had fallen asleep early, tired after a full day of play. Elena wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. "There's something so real about this place," she said, eyes fixed on the shimmering moonlit waves. "I've never seen Sophie laugh this much." "I've never seen you laugh this much," Daniel replied softly. Elena laughed, tilting her head slightly. Suddenly, Daniel turned toward her and took her hand. "Elena, there's something I've been thinking about for a long time." She looked at him, eyes uncertain. "I used to think I could never love again, that my life could only hold one woman. But then you came along, not to replace, not to compete, but to quietly step into the space that was always yours." Elena's heart pounded. She had never heard him speak so clearly. "You've healed Sophie. You've healed me," he continued. "You're not just the woman I love, Elena. You are the missing piece of a family I thought I'd lost forever." He pulled a small blue velvet box from his pocket. Under the moonlight, the silver ring sparkled, simple but exquisitely beautiful. "Elena," Daniel said, kneeling, voice deep and steady. "Will you do this with me? Not just be here, but stay? Become Sophie's mother and my partner in this life?" Elena covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. She leaned forward and whispered, "Are you sure?" Daniel looked straight at her. "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then, yes, I will." Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms. They didn't speak again, only the sound of waves, the breeze, and the beating of two hearts that had known sorrow, now choosing peace and each other.